Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews, with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the review copy I received of Beautifun Game's fast-paced puzzler, Professor Lupo and His Horrible Pets. Find out if I thought this title was a treat, or if it was due for the doghouse. Welcome to Aurora Station, a space station orbiting the Earth which serves as a laboratory for the self-proclaimed philanthropic Professor Lupo, an aficionado of aberrant aliens. Your role is that of the Professor's intern, tasked with ensuring that the collection of critters that have been captured stay content. A prospect that's even more important than usual due to the Professor's current fundraising project, an auction of his atrocious alien assembly to some earthbound warlords. That said, this particular bout of capitalism finds itself violently interrupted as the station is attacked and invaded. With communications down and chaos engulfing the Aurora Station, it'll take all you have to avoid being eaten alive by Professor Lupo's horrible pets. As far as narrative bits go, I found myself gradually warming up to the game more and more as I progressed through the stages. Whilst things did start out fairly straightforward, it does a decent job of incorporating some solid bits of foreshadowing, as well as tying in a good bit of humor to help avoid things becoming a slog. Frankly, I found the game's small gags and its more bleak bits of humor to be altogether endearing. And there are some instances of meta humor that also manage to be surprisingly plot relevant when you get back to it later. Ultimately, by the time I reached the end of the game, I'd been fairly satisfied with the journey, though I did find myself frustrated. See, the reason for the game says there's a secret ending, if you can manage to clear its optional objectives. Unfortunately, my instance of the game hit a hurdle on that front and stopped registering them correctly, hindering my ability to actually see that bit through. Thankfully, it wasn't a complete loss, since the act of doing a good portion of those objectives still did unlock a number of lore entries for me to go over, a number of which provided some solid bits of background to the game at large, providing insight both into the characters of Dr. Lupo, as well as into the overarching events. But that's a whole bunch about the narrative. Let's dive into how it plays. See, Professor Lupo and His Horrible Pets is a puzzle game, for the most part. You're tasked with clearing 100 different stages, all of which are replete with various obstacles and aliens. What provides it its nuance, however, is that each of these aliens have their own behavior patterns, which dictate not only how they'll try and annihilate you, but also how they interact with the environment and each other. To this end, I was actually pretty grateful that there was lore entries for them, which also cataloged all these behaviors and even highlighted ones relevant for the respective stage, as it provided some solid hints without spoiling the nuance of the puzzles. That said, while certainly a puzzle game, there's some fast-paced elements in it, as you'll occasionally be tasked with rapid-fire clicking around while being chased down by creatures. This isn't quite as frustrating as it could be due to mid-level checkpoints. That said, I found it to be a frequent staple of a number of the game's bonus objectives. Not all of them, mind you, as some are altogether clever alternate solutions or complications to navigate, but it was where I most encountered this phenomenon. It's also the point where I most often found myself dying due to odd pathing issues with the mouse, as it would occasionally see me trying to walk back into the direction of a monster, and when even split seconds count, that can be rough. What complicates this, however, is that I still found mouse movement more responsive than keyboard, as I was able to gain tiny bits of time by cancelling out the use animation on terminals with clicks, but not keyboard taps. That said, it was enough to prevent me from playing, as I did ultimately make my way through the entirety of the main game, and even went back to complete as many of the optional objectives and all the hard mode variants of the stages that were made available. Through gritted teeth occasionally, but I did my best. Unfortunately, that's where I encountered an odd bug, where it stopped properly registering the levels I cleared, leading me to being unsure of which of its 100 stages I'd need to finish a game, and thus dissuading me from trying to see the game's alternate ending. Still, I think it's ultimately a shame, so the game did have some lovely animations throughout, from the creatures which inhabit Aurora Station, to the animated character portraits, up to the outright cutscenes which serve to introduce each creature or highlight certain key moments in the game. Visually, I dug this title a fair bit, and whilst I did gradually become altogether familiar with the tracks used in its OST, I still found myself digging them enough that they never grew old. The voice acting was also genuinely enjoyable for the most part. Which brings me to the conclusion, and it's a bit tricky for me, if only because certain parts of this game resonated with me more than others. Whilst I don't normally go to my way to dive into puzzle games, I actually found myself quite fond of Professor Lupo's. Enough so that I kept going back to it even after I'd found a prior day had eroded my patience to pudding. Ultimately, by virtue of some fun storytelling and the main story, I would say it's a genuine hit. That said, the optional content felt incredibly frustrating, both to the occasional pathing-induced deaths, checkpoints resetting earlier bits of progress and requiring you to restart stages from scratch, and the finicky split-second timing. Between that and the fact that it didn't even seem to properly register my clears, I walked away before I could ever see the game's true ending, and with a bad taste in my mouth. But it really shouldn't detract from the main story branch, at least. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. There's also a Discord. You can click the link in the banner or description so you can become part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a Ko-fi running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor Rand, and make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description and banner for them links. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.